Welcome to The Catch Up, the podcast from the Daily Catch where we take you inside the news. My name is Walter Mullin, and I'm the publisher of the Daily Catch.
And I'm Emily Sachar, the editor of the Daily Catch.
In this podcast, we talk about stories we've covered in the paper and where they're headed, and take you behind the scenes to give you some more insights. And just a friendly reminder, if you enjoy our broadcast, please be sure to like or follow us on your favorite platform so you'll know when we drop new episodes. Emily, are you ready to catch up?
Let's do it, Walter. I'm going to bring home the bacon today.
You're going to bring home the bacon. We spent the past couple of podcasts doing some fun stories about the Dutchess County Fair, but now we have a somewhat serious story that happened at the end of the fair that we'll be talking about. So there was a great deal of controversy over an episode in the pig pen. Can you set the scene and tell us what happened?
Yes. So we're talking about the tent that I'm sure many of our listeners have visited, where the cows give birth to their baby calves over the course of the week. You can come watch X number of births. I think usually there's 10 or 15 of them over the course of the week. And in the front of that birthing tent, which I think is called the Salute to Agriculture tent, there is a demonstration pig pen. And every year, the Koon family of Red Hook, of Hill and Hollow Farm, brings in a sow and her recently hatched is the wrong word, but her recently birthed piglets. And this is something that requires a great deal of timing on their part. They need that sow to give birth almost exactly 3 to 4 weeks ahead of the fair so that those piglets look perfectly adorable for the demonstration. And they are inside an enclosure that is forbidden and off limits to human beings, except for the caretaker. And the caretaker is not somebody from the Koon family. It's somebody from the Dutchess County Fairgrounds. So I'm setting the scene for you of a pig pen with wood shavings along the bottom. 3 sides are enclosed, and the 4th side is a little, sort of like a little mini house where they store some of the materials that are needed for the pig pen. And that center is where people can look over the top of it, over the fence, and they can see the sow nursing and caring for her baby piglets. So that's the scene that I'm setting for you.
And I was at the fair, the Thursday of the fair, I was at the fair and I went in and saw the piglets. They were adorable. There must have been over a dozen of them.
I think there were 10. I think the sow had 14, and 4 of the piglets did not make it, which apparently happens. So there were 10 piglets. And you were there, I saw the piglets being brought in on the Sunday before the fair. The fair kicks off, as you know, on a Tuesday. And on Sunday, they go to a great deal of trouble. They bring in the animals. They bring in cows, pigs, sheep, all kinds of animals, chickens. That Sunday morning, they brought in the piglets, and each member of the Koon family carried in 1 piglet. The sow they led in with a little guiding post, and they carried the piglets, the children. It's a beautiful scene. You can see it in our newspaper.
And just to reiterate 2 things, the Koon family has been doing this for many years. Is that correct?
Decades, apparently, like 25 years they've been doing this. And they do it as volunteers. They are not paid to do this. This is something they do out of the goodness of their hearts. Pete Koon and Becky Shell, his fiance, manage this process. And it is their father, Pete's father, Bucky Koon, is on the board of directors of the Dutchess County Agricultural Society. So there's a lot of history, a lot of close family ties in this pig pen story.
And the other expectation the Koons have is that when they get the sow and the piglets into the pen, they are supposed to be fed and watered by an attendant. Is that right?
That is correct. And that's a big part of our story because they don't pay attention closely to what goes on in the pig pen. They've come to trust the situation. They have tremendous amount of other responsibilities. They have children who are showing animals. They are manning their own stalls. Becky herself is showing pigs. So they hand it off essentially to the Dutchess County Agricultural Society, to the staff of Andy Imperati to take care of the pigs.
And just one more point before we jump into what happened. While the fair is going on, the Koons are basically in a different part of the fairgrounds. They're not near the pig pen.
Yes, I'm very glad that you brought that up, Walter. So the Salute to Agriculture tent is not on 4-H Hill. 4-H Hill is where all the animals are kept. If you visit the fair, you know there are many, many barns, 12 barns or so. And that's where the animals are kept that are not part of the pig pen, that are part of other showings. So the cows, the Holsteins, the sheep, the pigs that are on display, etc., are up on 4-H Hill. The Salute to Agriculture tent is on the infield. So it's down near where the food is and sort of behind where the food is, out on this big infield display where you sometimes will go and see the Frisbee pigs are there. I'm sorry, the Frisbee dogs are there. The dog toss, where you can throw a ball out and the dog jumps for it. The band shell is over there as well. So that's where you find the pig pen display.
Okay, so the Koons have brought in the sow and the 10 piglets into the pig pen. They're in position. The fair gets underway. Now tell us about the incident. When did it happen and what unfolded?
Okay, so everything seemed to be going along fine as far as we know. We heard nothing. And then on Thursday of fair week, so 2 days, 2 full days, 2.5 days into the fair, John Koon's girlfriend notices that there are people inside the pig pen. Now, Walter, I didn't set the stage for you. There are signs on all 3 sides of the enclosure saying, do not touch the pigs. Do not touch the animals. She sees not just one, not just 2. She sees many people, and she sees a line of people to get in to the pig pen. This is something that is organized. So an organized system for both allowing people in and allowing them to wait to get in. She also noticed that the sow looked hungry and thirsty. So she sounded an alarm bell with her fiance, or boyfriend, I should say, and with Becky Shell, who had brought the pig and the piglets into the fairgrounds the Sunday prior. And she was very upset. And Becky got very upset. And apparently John Koon, who's the brother of Pete and the son of Bucky, came over to the pig pen and became very angry. Very, very angry. And words were exchanged, from what I understand. There also were photographs taken. So we have seen pictures, and in fact, we have run a picture in the newspaper that shows all these people in the pig pen. We see people taking selfies in the pig pen. So John was very upset and lost his temper.
And weren't they also picking up the piglets?
They were picking up the piglets. They were handling the piglets. They were touching the piglets. They were rubbing the piglets. And Walter, we should note, this is a mammal. When you have a mammal, a dog, a pig, a horse, and you get too close to that mammal's babies, that mammal can get very, very upset. And pigs are known to be angry. They can bite, they can hurt or wound, and they're large. They can knock a child over if they're angry. So the concern, of course, is you have people touching the piglets, that sow could have gotten extremely angry. Now, apparently she didn't. There, but for the grace of God, go we, right? But she could have. So John apparently, now I wasn't there, so I didn't see it and I didn't hear it. I don't know exactly what happened. But what we've been told is that he was angry and then angrier and then very angry. And I don't know whether, epithets were hurled or what, but the law enforcement was alerted. And within a short period of time, John was escorted from the pig pen off the grounds of the fairgrounds.
So my first question, Emily, is wouldn't there have been someone in the barn who was monitoring or overseeing the activity to keep this from happening?
We would think so, but we're not going to get ahead of the story because we don't have any direct evidence of exactly what happened. We know that there are signs that say no people in the pig pen, and we know that it was a very organized display. There were people on the ground. No one was asking them to leave. People were comfortable. They were having a good time in there and so forth. And there was a line of people waiting to get in. So we know that there was some kind of orchestrated situation that was allowed to unfold at the pig pen. We don't know by whom, we don't know why, but we know that that was the case.
And is this what the Dutchess County Fair management is trying to investigate and figure out what happened?
Yes.
Yeah.
The story doesn't end with the escort off the grounds. According to Andy Imperati, the president and CEO of the Dutchess County Agricultural Society, when Mr. Koon was escorted off, he was told not to come back onto the fairgrounds for the duration of the fair. But he did. On Saturday, he came back to watch his daughter perform in a livestock show, and no sooner had he arrived than 5 troopers arrived behind him, handcuffed him, and arrested him. And the charges with which he was hit, trespassing and disorderly conduct, are violations. They don't even rise to the level of a misdemeanor. Nonetheless, he was brought down to Troop K headquarters in Rhinebeck and booked on those charges.
There was additional fallout later when Bucky Koon made a decision. What did he do?
Yes. So when Bucky Koon, again, the father to John and Pete, whose pigs these are, right, and they're brothers, they live on the farm together, he found out, he processed this information and decided to resign. Now, there's another part of the story that I need to explain to our listeners, Walter, and that is that Bucky Koon, by his own admission, by his admission, John has a temper. And so the question that some are asking is, was there any justification for the police to take the action that they took, in which they were probably invited to take that action by the fairgrounds? So I need to take you back a few days earlier. So on that Sunday, when they brought in the pigs, there was another episode involving John Koon at the fairgrounds. And that was bringing his cows in and getting his cows ready for showing. He wanted to trim up the cows. And that's something that they typically do under a little pop-up tent behind the barn. All the different farmers set up these pop-up tents, right? They're open air pop-up tents, but they create a sun barrier because they have a little roof. And he was apparently told he couldn't put his pop-up tent out. And he apparently got very angry and lost his temper then. And according to Mr. Imperati, he was warned not to lose his temper again, or he would have an escort off the fairgrounds. What I've heard, though, from other people who think that the action that was taken was very strong is that he had every right to be upset about the treatment of the pigs because he has legal liability. If something had happened to the pigs or if something had happened to a person because the sow misbehaved or got angry or protected her cub, so to speak, that liability could possibly have landed on the lap of the Koons, right? The last thing they want is to have an injury involving their animals.
What kind of reader reaction, what kind of reader comments have we gotten from this story?
We have been inundated with comments about this story from people of all persuasions, people who are farm people, people who have agricultural connections, city people, government leaders. The interest in this story has defied any imagination I could have had. I thought it was an interesting story, but I didn't anticipate the extent of interest in this story. And I think for that reason, there's going to be continued interest in what the fairgrounds decide to do. Some other things that have been pointed out to me that I had neglected to note are that Andy Imperati is the brother of Kirk Imperati, the elected Dutchess County Sheriff. So while it was the state police that did the arrest, they all work very closely together. And there are some people who feel that that's a very confused and confusing situation.
So,
A little too close for comfort there.
so stepping back and sort of looking at the story objectively, there was clearly a breakdown in protocol in the birthing barn to allow this to happen. And that's what the fair management needs to unpack and figure out how and why that happened and to keep it from happening again. That's number one. And point number two, you have to consider the Koon family and their connections to the fair, their connections to agriculture over the years. So they're a deeply embedded, deeply beloved local family. So that's another piece of this that you have to take into consideration.
Yes, that's right. And I think, we need to also think about deeply beloved, but maybe by who? Like, I wonder if there is some awkward blood there between Mr. Imperati, who runs the fair, and the Koon family, or at least with John Koon, perhaps. We don't have the insight to know of all these relationships, but the fairgrounds is a complicated operation. And there are a lot of people involved. There are a lot of feelings. It's a lot more complicated than the beautiful presentation, Walter, that you and I see. And I can tell you, this is something interesting I've thought a lot about since the fair. And I often tell people that it's going to take 2 months for a new reporter to learn a beat. If the beat is Rhinebeck or Red Hook or environment, it's going to take you 2 months before you really feel a little bit of solidity. Well, I've been covering the fair for 5 years, and I've spent 6 or 7 days each year at the fairgrounds. I'm just starting to understand the fair. It is much more complicated than the midway and the rides and the food and the animals. There's a web of relationships, a web of connections, a web of protocols, and a web of changes. And understanding and being able to unpack those for our readers takes a great deal of time and finesse. And we're just
And,
starting to be able to bring that to our readers.
and I mentioned this to you in the last podcast. The fair operation is massive, and there's a lot of pieces to it, and there's a lot that could go off the rails. So here's an example of something that went off the rails very badly, but there's a lot that can happen there. It's a big, complicated operation.
That's exactly right. So we'll
So
be
do,
following it, doing our best to follow it in the coming days. And I hope that we will get an honest report. The Dutchess County Agricultural Society is run as a 501c3, so they owe a certain amount of information to the public. And I hope that they will transparently give that information to us.
when can listeners, when can readers expect to see the next step in this? Do we have any idea?
We really don't have any idea. We've been following up. We'll continue to follow up, but I don't have an answer for you. I wish I did.
So let's move on to our next topic, which is a very sad and very serious topic. Last month, there were two more suicides off of the Kingston Rhinecilff Bridge. This is a harrowing topic that appears to be coming up over and over again. Can you give some perspective on the bridge and death by suicide on this bridge and other bridges nearby?
Yes. So we have to reckon with the fact that the Kingston Rhinecilff Bridge is run by the New York State Bridge Authority. And that bridge authority runs 5 bridges. I'm going to go over them with you now. And they also run the walkway over the Hudson, which becomes relevant because there was also a recent suicide, death by suicide there. So they run the Rip Van Winkle Bridge between Hudson and Catskill. They run what we call our bridge, the Kingston Rhinecilff Bridge. They run the Mid Hudson Bridge in Highland. They run the Newburgh Beacon Bridge and the Bear Mountain Bridge. All of those are under their jurisdiction. So there are other Hudson River bridges that are manned by the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority. And for example, the George Washington Bridge is not manned by this New York State Bridge Authority. Now, this is a Hudson River problem, this jumping off the bridges. And as I mentioned, Mid-Hudson walkway over the Hudson, there was also a suicide there where a jumper, an individual who jumped into some land near the One Dutchess apartment complex down in Poughkeepsie. There have been enough attempts that for the last 4 or 5 years, there have been proposals by legislators to try to get some kind of capital plan underway to make these bridge jumps more difficult. So, for example, to put higher gates or some kind of higher surface situation so it would be difficult to jump over. Or other ideas have been to put something under the bridge. So if somebody were to jump, they would be caught, right? What has brought this back into the news again is not just the jumps themselves, but the fact that 2 legislators, Rhinebeck Town Supervisor Elizabeth Spinzia and a Mr. Quigley, who's the Ulster Town Supervisor, so on the other side of the bridge, have decided to work together to try to lobby the legislature and or to work with the New York State Bridge Authority to get some kind of plan together for a capital improvement plan to address the problem.
I think everyone would agree suicide prevention on the bridge is a good idea. So why is it so difficult to get this approved?
Well, let's talk about suicide prevention. So there are some things already in place. The New York State Bridge Authority at several bridges, at all of the bridges actually, has personnel available between 12 and 24 hours a day. Some bridges have 24-hour sort of surveillance, as it were, human personnel right there at the bridge. Some bridges have 18 hours, but they all have some personnel available. They also have, several of them have phone boxes. They also have notifications. If you feel that you feel desperate, here is a phone number to call. So it's not like they've done nothing. The issue is that to put in these retrofitting, these bridges were not designed for this kind of treatment. So to put in higher fences, for example, is very expensive. The estimated cost for retrofitting the Hudson Valley 5 bridges I just named for you, Walter, is between $75 million and $120 million. Well, why is that a hurdle? That is a hurdle because who is going to pay for that, right? Who is going to come up with that money? And you and I both know the answer to that, Walter. Who do you think is going to come up with that money?
Well, I think it has to come out of Albany.
Right, but who is going to pay for that? It's going to be the toll payers. It's going to be us. And there is no revenue right now to do that. There is no extra toll revenue to pay $75 to $120 million. So I don't know what the calculations would be of how much they would have to raise the tolls, but I don't know anybody who's happy when tolls get raised. So there is a very interesting tug here between every life is infinitely valuable, or certainly there is some number we can put on the life. And we would imagine the number of people who jumped off the bridge, I think it's been 22 just in the last few years alone, is worth perhaps more than the 75 to $120 million. But this is a calculus that the Bridge Authority, in cooperation with legislators, will need to be making and has already made. It's very hard to put a price when you're actually talking about raising tolls.
We should point out one other fact to the story, that cell service near or on the bridge is very spotty. And you mentioned there are dedicated landlines that go to suicide prevention hotlines. But when you jump on your cell phone on the bridge, it can be very difficult to get service.
Yes, I'm very glad you mentioned that. There is a plan, of course, there's two, from AT&T and from Verizon on quote unquote our side of the bridge, to put in new cell towers. In fact, the one behind Rugi's Automotive has already been erected. I believe that's the Verizon tower, but it hasn't been turned on. It hasn't been activated. And that is supposed to help also with communication, so that somebody who gets out on the bridge and is having those terrifying feelings and those decisions are being made will have an easier way to reach a person on this side of the bridge.
Yeah.
The other side of the bridge, I don't actually know what they're doing to improve cell service. They also have difficulty coming off on that side of the bridge. So these are very complicated balancing acts. These are policy initiatives. There are infrastructure concerns. There are timing concerns. There are budget balancing acts. It will be very interesting for us in the coming days, Walter, to see what Ms. Spinzia and Mr. Quigley are able to work out with the Bridge Authority.
There is no next specific milestone with the authority. They're just sort of trying to get a meeting or get something at the top of the radar.
That's right. And the legislature is not in session again until next January. Now, I mentioned there have been several bills. Bills have been moved out of committee in the Senate and onto the Senate floor and have passed, but they haven't been moved out of committee and onto the Assembly floor. And this is a very complicated problem because it's a Hudson River problem. New York State is a huge state. How do legislators in Western New York, where we don't see these bridge suicides happening, how are they going to reckon with this issue? How are they going to care? There are people who run these committees who have to decide to bring this out and onto the floor. So it's a very complex issue when you look at legislation in Albany, getting legislators to focus on something that is really sort of our problem in our community.
Makes sense. Well, we'll continue to follow it. So,
Yes, we will.
okay. Well, this concludes our broadcast for the moment, but let's wrap up with an Ask Emily and Walter. And today I'm going to ask you a question, Emily. Talk to us a little bit about when and how you choose to follow a story. Just thinking back to the Pigpen story briefly, that might seem like a somewhat small, insignificant story, and yet it's not. And the reader reaction to that has been tremendous, as you say. How do you balance and how do you evaluate when to go after stories and how deeply to go after stories?
Yeah, I mean, I should let our listeners know that we aren't able to cover everything we would like to cover and everything that has news value. For example, just a few weeks ago, a few days ago, we had the Art Studio Views, wonderful event that happened in the Hudson Valley or in northern Dutchess in particular. 30 different artists opened their studios to the public. And I would have loved to have been there and covered that, written a full story. We decided instead to do a video take on that because we could do that more quickly and maybe give it even just as strong an impetus and coverage. I decide based on my own interest in stories. And I think over many years, I'm very old by now, I have developed a sense of what is interesting. Some people say I have a tabloid sense. I think it goes beyond that. I think I do have a sort of gut human instinct, human interest instinct, but I think my instincts are also honed by listening to our community. And I've learned the kinds of stories that our community wants to read. They want to read and listen to stories that are directly about their lives here in the Hudson Valley. So I always ask myself, how many people will this affect? How many people will be interested in this? And if I think it's a large number, a large enough number, I'm going to cover it. Now, that tells you there are certain stories that are not going to appeal to all audiences. So we please some of the people all of the time and all of the people some of the time, but we don't please all of the people all the time. To me, the pigs was absolutely a given. I knew so many people who had visited the pigs, including you, and I thought it was a very strong human interest story. It's also an animal interest story, and animals are always popular in the Daily Catch. So this is a very interesting question, and I hope you'll ask it to me again and again and again, because we have a chance to think about it all the time, and we do.
And just I now have one quick follow-up question. You'd mentioned this in the past, but I think listeners are interested. How do you get story tips? You can't be everywhere all the time. So how do you hear about stories? How do you learn about things?
That's great. Our readers tell us a great deal of what's going on. In fact, the producer of this podcast, Matty Rosenberg, told us a couple of days ago about an incident he was able to photograph, the arrest involving somebody who was forcibly touching a woman on the train. And he happened to have photographs of that. And of course, that's something we're going to cover. It's happening in our area. Law enforcement stories are always of interest to the public. He had photographs to go with it. We get lots of tips from readers. We get lots of press releases. And we judge every single day, probably 50 or 60 stories, which ones we're going to cover. We can only cover 10 or 11 a week, 10 or 12 a week. But I hope we're doing a good job in covering the meat and potatoes and maybe a few frills when we can.
Good, good. Well, this concludes our episode of The Catch Up. A big thank you to Matty Rosenberg and Jen Hammoud at Radio Free Rhinecilff for their help in producing, and a big thank you to Esther Martell for her help in editing. Again, if you enjoy our broadcast, please be sure to like or follow us on your favorite platform. Emily, always a pleasure catching up with you.
Always great to be with you, Walter.